All right. So last week we looked at the Malbim and we looked at the Rabbeinu Yonah as they got into, exploring what is the idea of Chachmah, Bina, Daas. And I included in the source sheet the pasuk from Keith Tisa again this week, just as a reminder. This is really what propelled us into this topic in the first place. Was by B'Tzalel, Hashem says, "Va'amaleo so ruach Elokim." Right, I filled him with the spirit of Hashem. I have to understand what that means. B'chachma, b'tfuna, u'b'das, u'b'chol malacha. So, and we saw before that Rashi gave us some really sort of quick definitions of Chachma, Bina, Daas. That Chachma is what you learn from a teacher. Bina is being able to contemplate and really sort of work out the topic and be able to apply it in a practical sense. And Das is already at another level of Ruach HaKodesh. So let's take a look at the Ibn Ezra, who has a little bit of a different way of understanding. And it also will give us an interesting insight into this pasuk where it says, Hashem says, "I'll give B'Tzalel Chachma Bina B'das Ubechol Malacha." So what's Ubechol Malacha? What does that mean? What's that adding? So the Ibn Ezra starts off when it says Va'amaleo, so that I will fill him with Chachma Bina B'das. The Ibn Ezra says, Kamo v'Yehoshua ben Nun mole ruach Chachma. We see that by Yehoshua, and I think he's quoting in Sefer Yehoshua, after Yehoshua takes over the reins, as it were, from Moshe Rabbeinu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that he is filled with Ruach Chachma, because of V'nacha alav Ruach Hashem. So there's a similar language used by Yehoshua, that he has Ruach Hashem and he has Ruach Chachma. Uperusho ma hi Ruach Hashem. So what is that Ruach Hashem that we're talking about? Hi Ruach Chachma ubina. That is, I guess, the sort of the gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu of Chachma ubina, which,
I can't.
I guess it's like the old, the old adage that they say that common sense isn't so common, right? It's Chachma and Bina is not that it's not that common to have. It's certainly not, at the level that we're looking at with B'Tzalel or Yehoshua. HaChachma hi hatsuros haotzros ba'achronis moach harosh. And now we sort of sort of gives us an idea, I guess, somewhat biological, but gives us an understanding of Chachma. Umilas tvuna gam bina migzeres ben. But what's interesting is he gives us an idea. What is bina? Where does the word come from? It says it comes from bain, in between. V'hiat surah ha'omeres ben suras hadas ben suras ha'chochma keneged hanegev ha'amtsoy v'moach harosh. So without, I guess, delving into how he is understanding the biology, but he says that bina is that in-between stage between Chachma and Das. That's why it's Lashon Bain, in between. Ki ha-Chachma keneged hanegev ha'achrom hadas ha-mischaberes b'nagvi ha'moach ha-metzach mehargashos. He says b'Lashon Shema. He also tells us that, by the way, in Arabic, they also have, right, probably based on Islam, they also have these ideas of Chachma, Bina, Das. He gives us the Arabic words for them. We won't explore that. My understanding of Arabic is nothing, so we won't go there. He says, "V'hinei B'Tzalel haya male kol chachma b'cheshbon u'b'midos v'arachim." So he says that what is chachma regarding B'Tzalel? He says he gives us an idea that it's really about his capabilities, I think, on a more intellectual level, understanding it from a dimension standpoint, an accounting standpoint, a value standpoint. It all seems to be very intellectual. Umelechas shemayim, but then he says it's also about doing the work, literally the work for heaven, meaning the Mishkan. V'chachmas hatolados, v'sod haneshama, and he goes further that, but we're not just stopping. We're not just talking about intellectual pursuits that B'Tzalel had the capacity for, but it was also really understanding maybe this is consequences, maybe this means, the application of his Chachmah, the secrets of the neshama. V'haya lo yisron al kol anshe doro shahaya yodea kol malacha. But then the Ibn Ezra goes on and says, but it wasn't just, this, but we also have to understand that Bezalel was known as being sort of the craftsman for all the different components of the Mishkan. So that's beyond Chachmah. The Ibn Ezra is telling us that that's not just, an intellectual understanding of it. He was able to produce all of the different components of the Mishkan, working with wood, working with gold, silver, copper. This is a lot of craftsmanship and very intricate craftsmanship when you look at all those, all the kelim that went into the Mishkan. So this v'haylo yisron al kol anshe doro shahaya yodea kol malacha ki rabbi mechachmei lev lo yadu afilu malacha achas. He says, it's an interesting point that, we could understand today. It's one thing to say I'm a master electrician, and maybe it's possible to find somebody who's a master electrician and a master plumber, right? That's unusual, but certainly within the realm of maybe you can find people like that. But then try to say, well, this person's a master electrician, a master carpenter, a master plumber, right? And add three more, areas of craftsmanship at a mastery level. You don't find that. It doesn't exist.
Not only that, Jeff, there were slaves before. So right. What was the training?
Right, exactly. It's not like they were apprenticing with another master plumber or so. Exactly. So where would you find this? But he says that, it's one thing to find somebody who's a master craftsman in let's say, that was the other thing, right? You also had all the weaving and all the other sewing and weaving and leather works and all of that, right? Of all these different craftsmanship. So maybe you could find somebody who's become, or maybe, to your point, Uri, who somehow, had that skill, maybe even in Mitzrayim, who knows? But you're not going to find anybody who had all of those. And because of that, and that's what Bezalel was, he says, okay, in Kasuv, ubecho malacha bevav. What's ubecho malacha adding? It's adding the fact that not only did he have Chachmah, Bina, Daas, but he had this capability of being a master craftsman across many different areas. So that's the Ibn Ezra's understanding of or explanation for this pasuk. So now we're going to go into the Tanya, and I'm going to, quick, brief, just brief introduction into this. So this is clearly a sefer on the Nister, right? So what we're going to try and do is just look at it and try and glean some ideas of it that are on the Nigla level. And what's interesting is, and I think we'll see this, is that there is a Nigla level to the Nister. So that's something that we'll be able to pull out some ideas. But the Balatanya is going in a very different direction than what we've seen up until now. Up until now, it's been very much more on the intellectual level of, what is Chachmah? Chachmah is learning from a teacher. Bina is being able to learn how to apply those concepts on your own, which is the next level up. And the Balatanya is going in a different direction in terms of how does this apply to the personal growth of a person. That's what he's looking for in Chachmah, Bina, Daas. So maybe just a quick intro. The Balatanya was the first of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's. He was known as like the Alter Rebbe, right? He's known as the Balatanya. Rav Shneur Zalman was his name, from Liada. So he was the first of the 7 Lubavitcher Rebbe's. He also wrote the Shulchan Aruch Harav. So he wasn't, this was a huge Talmud Chacham. And this Shulchan Aruch Harav, while it may not be learned, quite as frequently, or you won't see it as often as a Shulchan Aruch from the Beis Yosef, and the Mishnah Berurah and all that, but it's still quoted quite often today. It is a huge masterpiece that he wrote as well. So, this is clearly a master that we're learning from here, and this is just one piece from the first chilek of the Tanya. So he says, "V'hinei kol bechina umadrega misholosh elu nefesh ruach uneshama." Klula me'eser bechiros, keneged Eser Sfiros, so Yonash Shtosh Lubehen. Now there's gonna be a lot to unpack here in these first few lines. So he says, Hanichlakos Lishtayim, Shein Shlosh Amos Vesheva Kfulos. Now he talks about the Eser Sfiros, the 10 Sfiros. You probably have heard that concept before. And he's going to sort of break it apart a little bit. And again, we're just going to look at it pretty superficially. But he says that when you look at it, there are two components of the 10 Sfiros. There's the 3 Amos and the Sheva Kfulos. Okay. So what are the 3 Amos? He says, Perish, Chachmah, Bina, Daas. So Chachmah, Bina, Daas are the first 3 of the Sfiros, and those are referred to as the Amos. Okay. V'shivas Yemei HaBinyan, and then you've got these, the 7 days of Binyan, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, right? These are the 7 attributes. Sometimes we say it's the attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but these should be familiar to us because we're actually going through this during the Sfiras Omer cycle, right? So each week represents one of these attributes. So Chesed, Gvura, we're on the 3rd week. We're in the middle of Tiferes, right? Today is actually Netzach Shebet Tiferes. So if Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and then Malchus. Those are the 7 different attributes that become these Shivas Yemei HaBinyan. Okay. V'kach b'nefesh ha'adam. So in the nefesh of the Adam, shenichlekas l'shtayim. So within nefesh, and he said that we have nefesh, ruach, and neshama. So now he's just looking at the nefesh of a person, and he says that the nefesh actually has 2 different components to it. We have seichel and we have midos, right? The intellectual and the midos, meaning I guess how we carry ourselves, how we conduct ourselves. Haseichel kolo chachma bina v'daas. So now we understand that. Within the nefesh is where we're going to see those first 3 of the Sfiros, the Chachmah, Bina, Daas. V'hamidos hein ahavas Hashem pachto vira. So lefero v'chulei. And the midos that we're talking about, that are the other part of the nefesh, those are how we develop love of Hashem, fear of Hashem, etc. Okay. The Chachmah, Bina, Daas nikru amos. So remember how we said before that the Spheros, the 10 Spheros are broken up into 3 Amos and Sheva Kfulos. So the 3 Amos are Chachmah, Bina, Daas. Umakor Lemidos, and they are the source. I think that's why he calls them the Amos. And this is not, I shouldn't say he calls it, this is, clearly he's pulling from, as they say, the Sifrei Kedoshim, probably, from the Zohar and other sources, as we'll see in just a moment. So he says, Lemidos, and the intellectual, the Chachmah, Bina, Daas, the Seichel, is the source for Midos. Ki Hamidos hein todos Chachmah, Bina, Daas, because the Midos are what comes out of it. I think that's why they're called the Amos, they're the mothers. They are what birth, if you will, all of the Midos. So they come from Chachmah, Bina, Daas. Ubir ha'inyan, ki hine, ha'seichel sheben nefesh hamiskeles, Shehu Amasko Kodavar, Nikra B'Shem Chachmah. So to further explain, he says, Chachmah is, again, it's the intellectual part of us. And he says the Chachmah comes from Koach of Ma. So in other words, the word Chachmah is made up of Kaf Ches and a Mem He, Koach Ma. Now, this is definitely on a Nistra level, but I have heard, and I think this is helpful to us, something again on the Nigla of the Nister, which is on a Drush level. How do we understand what Koach Ma means within Chachmah? So there's an interesting connection here of Ma, Memhe meaning Ma, that Moshe Rabbeinu uses, where Moshe Rabbeinu in multiple instances, as he's caught up in complaints and machlokas from Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar, he says, "Va'anachnu ma." He says this, I think, in Parshas B'Shalach already, like right when it all starts, and he says it by Korach, perhaps other places too. And he says, "Why are you fighting with me and Aaron? Va'anachnu ma. What are we?" Right? And Chazal understand when Chazal compare Moshe to to Avraham and David, who all are, have incredible levels of anav, of humility. They said that Moshe Rabbeinu is at the top. Why? Because Avram Avinu said, "Ani offer ve'efer, right? I'm dust and I am ash." David Melech in Tehillim says that he is a tolas, that he's just a worm. Okay, but each one of those things is something. Right? There's something to them, and they have value, and they do something in the world around us. But Moshe Rabbeinu says, "V'nachnu ma." What are we? We're nothing. And clearly, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron and Cohen were not nothing, right? They achieved incredible things. So you have the Cohen Gadol, the first Cohen Gadol. You've got Moshe Rabbeinu, who in many ways is our first Melech, delivers the Sefer, delivers the Torah to us, et cetera, et cetera. Right? These are incredible accomplishments that these two people provided during their time of leading Bnei Israel. And he still says, "V'nachnu ma." So the drush is, the koach of ma is the koach of being able to look at yourself with humility and say, what am I really on the, in the grand scheme of things, right? Compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, compared to Bnei Yisrael, compared to Torah, compared to Eretz Yisrael, all the different components of Kedusha, what am I? And it's only through the koach of ma that you can achieve what Moshe Rabbeinu achieved and what Aaron Cohen achieved, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's, at least, again, it's on a superficial level, on a drush level, we can understand a little bit of what the Tanya is trying to tell us, that is Chachmah. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. It says, "Ukeshemotzi kocho el hapoel, שמזבונים בשכלו להבין דבר להשול לעומקו, מתוך איזה דבר חכמה מושקע בשכלו." So he says, when you try to take this, the theoretical to something that you can apply, he says that's nikra bina. And again, I think maybe a nuance, I think it's probably different, but it is similar, at least in concept, to what we saw before. The bina, again, is what comes out of his bonanus, of contemplation, of working out the details, of really trying to figure out what's going on. And he says, "V'hein heim av v'eim hamolidos ahavas Hashem v'yiraso bepachto." And he says that Chachmah and Bina become the of and the aim, again, this idea of mother and father, and that's what brings about Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Ki aseicho shebenefesh hamiskeles כשמזבונים מעמיק מאוד בגדולת השם, איך הוא ממלא כל עמים וסובב כל עמים וכולה קמא כלא חושב. He says, when you start to contemplate the incredible greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I think what he means is, like, for example, you can take all the different things that happen around us in the world. You take a simple seed and you plant it, and it's amazing how it starts to sprout and grow, and like it's just conceptually like the godless of the creation around us, or the human body, how we how all of our different components of our body work, how we stay healthy. There's so many different examples of this, and perhaps even more so when you're a scientist, when you study these things more in depth, how much more so as we study these should our own Ava and Yira grow along with it. So he says, "Noda v'nis aura midas yiras haromamus b'mochu machshavaso." That should create an awakening in us of these midos of awe, of just the awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and what and his capabilities, capacity. Liyarei lizboshis migdulaso yisbarach she'ein la sof v'tachlis. And to not just have awe, but also to be a bit, he says, a little bit maybe embarrassed or a little bit more, humbled by the idea of the infinite, that Kodesh Baruch Hu is an Ein Sof. Upachad Hashem belibo, and you have the fear of Hashem, grows in your heart. V'shuv yislahiv libo bi'ahava aza k'rash be'yesh. And this, in turn, should then create a fire in your heart. Bechashika to create this love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. kalos hanefesh. This is a longing for the soul. And he quotes David Melech, nichtzefa v'gam kalos nafshi, my soul, longs for. This is, and it's about longing for Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Ksiv tzama nafshi lelokim, or that my soul thirsts for Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Tzama lecha nafshi, again another idea of that. But quoting these different ideas of this, the love of Hashem that we can develop. But Tzimon hu miyasod ha'esha b'nefesh alokis, and the thirst comes from the fire in the nefesh that's this holy, in the holy nefesh. So now he says, and you want to know where these concepts come from? He says this is all coming from the Eitz Chaim she'esod ha'eshu belay, that the fire comes from the heart, bekor hamayim ba'alechos ma'amoach, and water from the brain. Eitz Chaim shar nun. This is all. If you want to understand more, look at the Eitz Chaim shar nun. The Eitz Chaim is one of the Kisvei ha'ari. Right, the Arizal wrote the Zohar Kodesh, but then I think it was his Talmud Rav Chaim Vital, who then compiled together his other works into the Kisvei Ari, and the Eitz Chaim is one of them. So, again, we're seeing that where these ideas are coming from, and certainly we're going to try and delve into this. Shehi bechinas chachma shenikra mayim shebenefesh alokis v'shara midos kulan hein anfi ayir v'hava v'toroseim. And he says all of the midos really come from Yira and Ahava, and what comes out of them. There's a whole bunch of branches within Yira and Ahava. They're not just one thing. Okay. Okay. But Daas, so maybe we'll pause and we'll say, okay, so Chachmah and Bina, what they should be doing, and I think what he was trying to give us, up above when he was bringing out the spheros, is that Chachmah, Bina, and Daas, and up until now, we've said Chachmah and Bina, they should be operating within ourselves to help us understand and get to those levels of understanding the different attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what they do in so doing, I guess, or on the path going down that path, they create within us, as we are, understanding and looking at the world around us, they should be creating within us Ahava and Yira. So he says, "V'hadas hu meloshon v'ha'adam yada eschava." Right? It's the idea of a husband knowing his wife, right? Using the lashon of ladas. V'hu lashon hiskashus v'hischabros. And he says that this is a language. What does it mean that he knew his wife? It means that there is a deep connection, right? A very intimate and deep connection between them. Shemekasher daito bekesher amiz v'chazak ma'od. That there is a at this level of Das, there is a deep connection that's very strong. And this is what brings us to a strengthening and an increasing of the of the understanding and yearning for the Ein Sof, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's as if you think about like the starting of a love affair, where you can't get the other person off your mind. You can't get Hashem off your mind. You're just constantly thinking about Hashem. Because so too, somebody who is a chacham and a navon, as it relates to understanding the godless of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if he hasn't achieved das, to where that thought process, or those thoughts are strong and consistent and constant, lo yoli benefesh yira v'ava amitis, then you will not get to the level of true yira and ahava. Ki'im dimyonos shav. They won't lead you there. So das becomes sort of like the next level up, that to achieve. And this is where chesed and gvura meaning again, ahava and yira, perush ava ve'anfeha v'yira ve'anfeha. So I think a couple of really interesting thoughts are coming out of here. One is that, many times we have this concept of developing Yiras Hashem before you can develop Avas Hashem, right? The Yiras Hashem is a lower level, Avas Hashem is a higher level. But what the Balatanya seems to be telling us is that as you look around you at the world, you should be able to, if you're doing that with the mindset of understanding Kadosh Baruch Hu, that should bring you to love, and later on that brings you to awe or the fear. So love almost becomes a first level of this. Developing a level of Avas Hashem comes before Yiras Hashem, meaning the awe of Hashem, of the reverence of wanting to make sure that we're doing the right things according to the Torah, according to Halacha. That comes later. Avas Hashem comes first. So, it's again, this is a very different direction than we saw before, Alpi Chasidus, Alpi the Balatanya. But clearly what he's trying to do is say, what do Chachmah, Bina, Daas do for us as we are building a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How does that manifest itself? How does it help us to create that relationship? And I guess in that vein, that's really the ultimate, or the reason why we have Chachmah, Bina, Daas.